I was halfway through welding a busted gate hinge when I saw the dust cloud rising down the dirt road. I live on a 20-acre ranch outside of town, just barely inside the boundaries of the Ridgewood Trails HOA. That technicality has been the bane of my existence ever since I moved here 5 years ago. I'm Paul Norwood, a retired motorcycle mechanic turned rancher. All I wanted was space and peace. Instead, I got Winnona Whitmore. Winona is the self-appointed president of the HOA, even though nobody remembers voting for her. She's in her late 50s, always wears a visor even when it's cloudy, and walks around with a clipboard like she's leading a military operation. Her latest obsession: my ranch. Apparently, my vintage motorcycle collection, the barn I converted into a garage, and the weekend visits from my old biker buddies have lowered the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. Her words. I told her once, "Winona, if you don't like the view, stop looking over my fence." That didn't go over well, so when I saw the convoy of 3 black SUVs crawling toward my property, I knew exactly who sent them. They rolled up like they were DEA agents. Out jumped 4 guys in matching polos that said Ridgewood Compliance Patrol. I kid you not. They had radios, clipboards, fake badges, everything but the authority. One of them, a lanky guy with a goatee and wraparound sunglasses, stepped forward. "You Paul Norwood?" he asked like he was about to read me my rights. "Depends. You bringing beer or trouble?" He didn't laugh. "We've had multiple complaints about unauthorized structures, unregistered vehicles, and code violations. Under HOA Bylaw 7.3, we are authorized to conduct a property inspection." I leaned on my welding torch and stared at him. "You're not cops. We're the Ridgewood Compliance Patrol, still not cops." That's when the door of the barn creaked open and out walked Gator, 6'4", leather vest, beard like a grizzly bear. He was followed by Tank, Reggie, and a few more of my old crew. We were doing a weekend rebuild on an old Harley Panhead. The guys were greasy, sweaty, and not in the mood for clipboard warriors. "Everything all right out here, Paul?" Gator asked, wiping his hands on a rag. The HOA squad suddenly looked like they'd walked into the wrong bar. I caught the twitch in the goatee guy's left eye. He glanced at Gator, then at Tank, who was casually flipping a socket wrench in his hand like a baton. "Sir," he said carefully, "we don't want any trouble, we just need to inspect for code violations." "You got a warrant?" I asked. "No, but under HOA rules don't override state law," I cut in. "And this is private property. You step 1 inch past that gate without my permission, you're trespassing." Winona's white Lexus pulled up just as things were getting heated. She stepped out with her usual flair, visor in place, lips pursed tight enough to crush coal into diamonds. "Paul Norwood," she barked, "this isn't your personal junkyard. This is a community. You see a community here, Winona?" I asked, motioning to the open land, the cattle, the barn, and the dozen bikers now watching her like she was a fly in their beer. She didn't flinch. "You've ignored every letter, every fine, every notice. You gave me no choice but to escalate. By sending your fake cops onto my land, they're authorized compliance officers." I turned to Gator. "You boys mind showing our guests back to the road?" "With pleasure," he said and cracked his knuckles. The HOA clowns backed off fast, muttering about legal action and bylaws. Winona stood her ground for a moment longer, then pointed a trembling finger at me. "This isn't over, Paul. You'll regret refusing a lawful inspection." I crossed my arms. "You'll regret calling that lawful." She stormed off, kicking up dust in those pristine white sneakers. I watched the SUVs roll away, but I knew this wasn't over. Winona wasn't the type to lose quietly, and something told me she was just getting warmed up. The Monday after the little standoff, I was elbow-deep in engine grease when my neighbor, Leila Martinez, came down the gravel path in her old Ford pickup. She's a veterinarian who runs a small animal rescue on the other side of the ridge, and she's one of the few people out here who's never bowed to the HOA circus. Her eyes were sharp behind her aviators as she climbed out, holding a manila folder thick with papers. "You're not going to believe what I found in the county records," she said, handing it over. I wiped my hands on a rag and flipped through the folder. Inside were property plats, zoning maps, and a permit history that looked like a rat's nest of red ink. Leela pointed to a highlighted section. "That's your parcel. See how they redrew the Ridgewood Trails boundary line 2 years ago? That didn't go through the Planning Commission. No vote, no public notice. It was filed by a private contractor hired by Ridgewood's board chair under a temporary land use variance 1 that expired 6 months before the filing." I stared at the document. "So they never had jurisdiction over my land?" "Not legally, no. But they've been acting like they do ever since." That explained a lot: the sudden uptick in mailed fines, the threats about mandatory compliance, and the fabricated rulebook they tried to shove in my face. Winona had annexed my property on paper, hoping no one would notice. She was playing Empire Builder with other people's dirt. Leela leaned against the truck. "I've already got a friend at the county assessor's office digging into the signatures. If any of them were forged or backdated, that's fraud." "Keep going," I said. "Let's burn the whole rotten tree." Later that night, I installed 2 more trail cams at the back fence line. I didn't trust that Winona wouldn't try another end run, especially with her fake patrol squad sniffing around. Sure enough, just before midnight, my phone buzzed with an alert. I checked the feed and caught a grainy image of 2 men in dark jackets slipping through the brush behind the barn. One of them carried a bolt cutter. I called the sheriff. By the time deputies arrived, the guys had fled, but not before tripping the motion lights and leaving a partial boot print in the mud. One of them dropped a laminated badge that read Ridgewood Emergency Enforcement Unit. It looked like something printed at a mall kiosk. The deputy, a no-nonsense woman named Ruiz, took one look at it and raised an eyebrow. "Emergency enforcement? That's not a thing." "Not in real life, no," she bagged it. "If they trespassed with intent to damage property, we're looking at attempted vandalism." "You want to press charges?" "Absolutely." The next morning, I headed down to the county building with Leela's folder tucked under my arm. I filed an official complaint with the zoning office, then sat down with a county investigator named Malcolm Kerr. He was a soft-spoken guy with wire-rim glasses, and the kind of patience that only comes from decades of dealing with bureaucratic nonsense. "This isn't the first time Ridgewood Trails has pushed boundaries," he said, paging through the documents. "They've filed 4 annexation requests in the past year alone. 2 of them were rejected, one's still under review. Yours was never even submitted through the proper channels." "What does that mean legally?" "It means their claim is invalid. Any enforcement action they've taken based on it is null. If they've collected fines or altered property records, they could be liable for damages." I left his office with a signed affidavit stating my land was outside Ridgewood's jurisdiction. I made 10 copies. That weekend, we hosted another garage rebuild, this time with a guest list. Folks from all over the area showed up. Ranchers, retirees, even a few city council members who'd heard the rumors about Ridgewood's overreach. I stapled the affidavit to a corkboard next to the barn entrance. People lined up to read it like it was a declaration of war. Tank brought burgers. Reggie set up a sound system and blasted Credence. Gator manned the smoker. The whole place turned into a neighborhood block party, the kind that didn't need permission slips or permit fees. I noticed Winona standing across the road later that afternoon, arms crossed, watching from behind her sunglasses like a hawk circling a field mouse. She didn't say anything, just stood there. When she finally left, I saw her make a call from her car. 2 days later, I got a letter from the Ridgewood Trails legal office on cheap letterhead and riddled with typos declaring that I was in breach of covenants and owed $17,000 in fines. 17. For what? They didn't specify. I drove to the county courthouse and filed a restraining order against the Ridgewood Trails Board. Then I called a reporter. Her name was Dana Lister, and she worked for the local paper's investigative desk. She brought a photographer and spent 3 hours interviewing me, Leela, and half a dozen neighbors who'd been harassed, fined, or threatened by HOA patrols claiming non-existent authority. The story hit the front page the next Sunday. HOA overreach sparks rural revolt. The photo showed me in front of the barn, arms folded, with the affidavit pinned behind me. The article outlined years of unchecked power, fabricated fines, and false boundary claims. It quoted Kerr, Ruiz, and 3 other officials confirming everything we'd dug up. By Monday afternoon, the sheriff's office had opened an investigation into Ridgewood's board. 2 of the fake patrol members were picked up for questioning. One rolled almost immediately, admitting they were paid under the table and told to create pressure on non-compliant properties. They wore radios that didn't work and carried forms pre-marked with violation codes. Winona had been signing off on all of it. I barely recognized her when they brought her into the station. Her visor was gone, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She didn't say a word as she passed me in the lobby, escorted by 2 deputies. No clipboard, no barking orders, just silence. Later that week, I got a call from Kerr. They've uncovered doctored financial records, at least $30,000 in unreported expenditures tied to enforcement operations. The DA's office is reviewing it for criminal charges. I walked out to the barn and looked over the open fields. The sky was clear, the wind quiet for once. No patrols, no subs. Just the sound of cattle lowing in the distance and the steady clang of Gator tuning a carburetor. Leela pulled up again, this time holding 2 cold beers. She handed me one. "You think that's the last of them?" I took a long drink before answering, "No." But it's the first time they've had to play defense. The news coverage spread faster than a brush fire in July. By the end of the week, my mailbox was buried in letters, some from locals thanking me for standing up, others from people I'd never met, sharing horror stories about Ridgewood Trails or similar HOA tyrannies across the state. A few even included copies of their own documentation maps, letters, and in one case, a photo of a Ridgewood board member allegedly pouring bleach into a neighbor's koi pond. I handed that one straight to the sheriff's office. But the real pressure cooker came to a head when the county audit team finished their sweep of Ridgewood's financials. I got the call from Dana first. "They found something," she said, voice low and tense. "Something big." Later that afternoon, I met with her and Malcolm Kerr in the county annex building's back conference room. It was the kind of place they used for zoning disputes and water rights hearings: plain walls, dusty blinds, and a whiteboard covered in half-erased parcel numbers. Malcolm spread out a series of documents across the table, each stamped with the county seal. "They diverted development funds," he said. "Over $70,000 earmarked for road maintenance and firebreak expansion. Ridgewood Trails rerouted those funds into a shadow account labeled Emergency Enforcement Services." Dana leaned in. "That's how they paid their fake patrols, but it gets worse." She pulled out a printed email chain. The sender, Winnona Whitmore; the recipient, a third-party contractor listed as Westland Asset Solutions. The subject line read, "Foreclosure targets Phase 1. They were preparing to forcibly foreclose on properties they declared chronic violators," Dana said, "even though they had no legal authority to do so. They compiled a list of homeowners who'd either refused to pay fines or hadn't responded to notices, most of them elderly or low income." Malcolm tapped the second page. "They used manipulated GPS data to justify false boundary claims. Claimed the properties were within Ridgewood's jurisdiction even when they weren't, and they attempted to file pre-foreclosure paperwork with forged assessor signatures." I stared at the list. My name was third from the top. "I want them prosecuted," I said. "All of them?" "You're not the only one," Malcolm replied. "The DA's office is convening a grand jury." That night, Gator and Reggie helped install motion-triggered floodlights across the east pasture, not because we were scared, because we were angry. If someone tried sneaking onto this land again, they'd be lit up brighter than a county fair. I also added infrared cameras with cloud backup. I wasn't giving Ridgewood another inch, not even in the dark. 2 days later, the sheriff's office executed a search warrant on the Ridgewood Trails HOA office. Deputies locked down the building at dawn, boxed up computers, pulled hard drives, and carried out bankers' boxes filled with file folders. One deputy I recognized from the barn party gave me a nod as he walked past. Winona wasn't there. She'd resigned the day before, citing health concerns. But they picked her up that afternoon at a private airstrip 15 miles outside of town. She had a one-way ticket to Arizona and a suitcase full of HOA records. The arrest made the evening news. Former HOA president accused of fraud, forgery, and attempted illegal foreclosures. I watched it in the barn while Reggie soldered a carburetor valve and Tank grilled a round of sausages. Gator sat beside me, arms crossed, chewing sunflower seeds. "You think she thought no one would notice?" he asked. "She didn't care if we noticed," I said. "She just didn't think we'd fight back." The next week brought a string of court filings. I was named a central witness in the civil case against Ridgewood Trails and a cooperating party in the criminal investigation. I spent 3 days giving depositions, handing over emails, surveillance footage, and hard copies of every letter Winona ever sent me. But the most satisfying moment came during the first hearing, held in a packed courtroom beneath flickering fluorescent lights. The defense attorney tried to argue that Ridgewood's actions were consistent with a community's right to self-regulate. I leaned forward in my chair. "The community didn't regulate anything," I said. "A handful of board members faked documents, stole money, and tried to steal homes. That's not regulation, that's racketeering." The judge raised an eyebrow but didn't object. The defense attorney stammered but moved on. By the end of the hearing, the judge froze all Ridgewood-controlled accounts pending further investigation and barred them from issuing any new fines, notices, or compliance actions. The board members who hadn't already resigned were placed under temporary injunctions. The sheriff's office was assigned to monitor HOA communications until the investigation concluded. 1 week later, the Ridgewood Trails sign at the neighborhood entrance vanished, overnight replaced with a plywood board scrawled in spray paint. "Community, not control." I didn't put it there. Neither did Leela. But I had a pretty good idea who did. The fallout wasn't just legal. Half the homes in Ridgewood Trails replaced their mailbox flags with American flags. The other half took down the security cameras the HOA had forced them to install. A few folks even reopened their backyard gates to let horses roam freely again, something that had been banned under the old bylaws. Then came the town hall meeting. It was held in the Ridgewood Community Center, the same building where Winona once held court with her clipboard and laminated threat sheets. This time, the chairs were arranged in a circle. No stage, no microphone, just neighbors talking like neighbors. Layla stood up first. "I don't want another board, I want a council, rotating members, term limits, no power over private property unless it's tied directly to safety or infrastructure." Someone else added, "And every dollar spent should be accounted for open ledger public access." I spoke last. No more patrols. No more fines disguised as donations. And if anyone ever tries to redraw a property line without a vote, we take it straight to the county. The room applauded, not out of politeness, out of relief. Afterward, I found myself standing by the coffee urn with an older man I hadn't met before. He introduced himself as Walter, said he'd lived in the neighborhood since the 90s. "I was on the original HOA," he said. "We just wanted a gravel road and a shared well, never meant for it to turn into this." I nodded. "Power draws the wrong kind of people." He looked around the room, where people were laughing, talking, shaking hands. "Maybe now we've got the right ones." The grand jury eventually handed down multiple indictments: mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud, and misuse of public funds. Winona and 2 former board members were arrested again, this time with bail set high enough to keep them grounded. I never saw them again. But I still see the ranch every morning when I step outside. Still see the barn, the open fields, the rusted gate hinge I never quite finished welding. It swings smooth enough now. Doesn't creak anymore. Neither does the land. 3 weeks after the indictments dropped, the county courthouse overflowed with residents, reporters, and more than a few off-duty deputies leaning against door frames with arms folded. The trial of Ridgewood Trails' former board had begun, and it wasn't shaping up to be the quiet, technical affair most HOA scandals end in. No, this one had teeth. I wasn't in the first wave of witnesses, but I was subpoenaed to appear on day 4. Until then, I kept my head down and my ranch running cattle to feed, fencing to reinforce, and Gator's latest project, a 68 Electra Glide, to help reassemble. The barn had become something of a local legend by then. Folks dropped by to shake hands, drop off pie, or just sit and listen while we rebuilt engines like nothing had happened. It was the most peace we'd had in years. Then a call came in from a local contractor named Jeb Hollister, a bulldozer operator with a grudge and a half against Ridgewood. "They paid me to tear down sheds and porches," he said. "Told me the owners had signed off. I never saw one permit. I didn't ask questions back then, but I kept the invoices. You want 'em?" He showed up the next morning in a rust-riddled flatbed and handed me a folder of carbon copies. They were work orders on Ridgewood letterhead, authorizing demolitions on 6 properties. Each one had a forged signature from a different homeowner. One of them belonged to a retired nurse named Elva who died the year before. I brought the documents straight to the assistant district attorney, a wiry woman named Dorsey who didn't traffic in small talk. She flipped through the folder with a frown that deepened by the page. "This wasn't just overreach," she said. "This was orchestrated property interference. And if the signatures are fake, that's criminal fraud and destruction of private property." "Then you'll need to talk to Jeb," I said. "He'll testify." She nodded once. "We'll add it to the charges." When my day in court arrived, the courtroom was packed. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with silver hair and a gavel that echoed like a rifle crack, called me up. I took the oath and sat down, the affidavit Leela gave me months ago tucked in my back pocket for luck. Dorsey stood. "Mr. Norwood, can you describe what you witnessed on the night of March 22nd regarding individuals entering your property without permission?" I recounted the trail cam footage, the bolt cutters, and the badge one of the men dropped. I described the fake patrols, the laminated IDs, and how they tried to claim authority they never had. I named names: Winona, the goatee guy I later learned was named Brent Davison, and the phony compliance officer who tried to hand me a citation for having too many motorcycles in a barn. Dorsey narrowed in. "And did these individuals ever provide you with any legal documentation authorizing their inspection?" "Not once." They waved around a rulebook like it was the Constitution, but not one of them had a warrant, a court order, or even a valid permit. The defense attorney, a slick, overconfident man in a tailored suit, rose for cross. "Mr. Norwood, isn't it true that you have a history of friction with Ridgewood Trails regulations?" "I have a history of ignoring nonsense." "Would you say you have a personal grudge against the defendants?" "I have a personal grudge against people who lie, steal, and try to bulldoze homes belonging to veterans and retirees." "You want to call that personal? I'll wear it." The judge didn't even blink. She let the silence hang as the defense attorney adjusted his cuffs and sat back down. By the end of the week, testimony from Jeb, Leela, and 3 elderly residents who'd been targeted for foreclosure painted a picture so damning it didn't need embellishment. The prosecution played a recording of Winona giving instructions to an undercover officer she thought was a hired enforcer. She discussed targeting non-compliant homes and advised him to leave a warning on properties that resisted. When asked to clarify what warning meant, she said, "They don't listen unless something gets broken." That recording sealed it. closing arguments came the following Monday. Dorsey stood in front of the jury, the Ridgewood Trails ledger book stacked beside her like bricks. "This was not an HOA," she said. "This was a criminal enterprise hiding behind a picket fence. They forged documents, stole funds, impersonated law enforcement, and attempted to steal land from citizens who trusted them. They didn't enforce rules, they enforced fear." The defense barely mustered a rebuttal. The jury returned in under 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: fraud, impersonation of law enforcement, criminal trespass, conspiracy to commit property theft, and unlawful destruction of private property. Winona's face didn't move when the verdict was read. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stared ahead like someone who'd finally been forced to see something she'd always refused to believe. That power doesn't make you untouchable. Sentencing was swift. Winona got 7 years. Davison and the others received between 3 and 5. The judge also ordered full restitution to the homeowners, whose properties had been damaged or falsely fined. With Ridgewood's board dissolved and their accounts frozen, the county appointed a temporary trustee to oversee the HOA's remaining obligations: trash pickup, road maintenance, and the few shared utilities still standing. The rest, dissolved by court order. The Ridgewood Trails HOA ceased to exist on the 1st of the following month. Word spread fast. That plywood sign at the entrance came down, replaced with a hand-painted one that read, "Welcome to Ridgewood Valley." No boards, no bosses, just neighbors. The barn became our new meeting place, not for anything official, just a place where people came to talk, share food, and swap stories. Layla brought her rescue dogs. Reggie ran an oil change clinic for folks who couldn't afford a mechanic. Gator started teaching kids how to rebuild engines. I even opened up the pasture for a spring fair, no permits required. Just good folks and grilled food. One morning, I found a folded envelope wedged into my gatepost. Inside was a check from the county restitution fund payment for the damages I'd incurred, plus a small bonus for community leadership. I didn't cash it right away. I left it under a magnet on the fridge, where it stayed until I figured out what to do with it. In the end, I used it to build a shaded pavilion near the barn. We set up picnic tables, a horseshoe pit, and rigged a speaker system so Reggie could blast his vintage vinyls on weekend nights. Kids played tag in the field while their parents drank sweet tea and talked about weather, engines, and livestock never bylaws. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Leela walked over with her arms crossed and a rare smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "You ever think about what would have happened if you just paid the fine and let it go? I'd have a lot fewer gray hairs, but we'd still be stuck under that board." I took a deep breath and looked out over the valley. The cattle were calm, the engines were quiet, the people were free. "Sometimes the only way to fix something broken," I said, "is to tear it down and build it right." She raised her bottle in a silent toast. We clinked. No speeches, no declarations, just the sound of laughter, hammers in the distance, and the wind moving easy through the open fields.